Hi, this is Erin, and welcome to Everything EFL. If you're wondering where Shane is, catch our last episode. So I'm back this week with the dazzlingly positive Erin Myers of the Educator's Mindset podcast. How are you?
I'm great. Happy to be back again.
Good. How's the weather in San Diego?
Oh, it's starting to cool down a little bit, so I'm really grateful for that. And cool down is like 60 degrees, so I know it's not that cold, but I'll take anything I can get.
You don't know the meaning of the word cold.
I don't. I totally know that.
You don't want to, trust me. Okay, so last week we had so much fun. I thought I'd invite you back for another episode. You gave some really good tips last week about using Zoom. So I thought that this week we could explore the topic of online learning, and you could give some tips, not necessarily technical ones, but how to engage students and build relationships. Because I think this, just like looking around on Instagram, I think this is something that some teachers are struggling with. So can we start by taking us through like your first 10 minutes of class? So what are the typical issues? And I imagine now you're experienced enough to overcome them to a certain degree.
To a certain degree, yes. I mean, I think with online learning, there are always possibilities of something going wrong or different than you had planned. Flexibility is key. And I think that when I think of the first 10 minutes of my class, it's really the time that I use to connect with my students. And so with online learning, it could take a couple seconds to a couple minutes for students to log in. So I recommend for teachers to have like a 5 to 10 minute activity where it's just community building, because it allows time for students to get logged in and get set up. So for my class, what I like to do, and I actually just gave my students a survey and they like it too, so highly recommend, not myself, but also my students. What I do is I have an agenda slide up displayed for students as they're entering. I have my video on, but my microphone's off, because as they're entering, I'm actually taking attendance. On the agenda slide, it has what we're doing for the day. It's really helpful for students who might have anxiety of unknown classes and what to expect. So that really helps. The learning objectives for the class, I have a timer that counts down so they know when class will start. And I also have
nice.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And then I also have an attendance question that's really fun. It's not necessarily related to our language and literature class, but just a great way to get to know students.
For example?
For example, the other day I asked students, and this ranges and it builds as I get to know them better. So I'll start off with simple things of, do you prefer TV shows or movies? And they'll write in the chat TV shows or movies. I just ask them to answer the question simply to get that engagement going. And then what I'll do is I actually have popsicle sticks, which I'll talk about a little bit later in this show. But I pull students' names and I do 2, I call them voluntold, where I tell them they have to share, and then 2 volunteers. And so I'll pick a popsicle stick, ask them to share what they wrote, and then explain why. So elaborate on their answer. It's a great way to get students to get to know each other as well. And if students are a little stuck, I'll let them pass for the moment and I'll have a couple other students share, and then I'll go back to the original student and say, okay, you heard some other ideas. What do you think? So,
yeah. Do they ever get to, because there could be quite an awkward age there, do they ever get to the point where you could stick them in a breakout room to discuss the question together, or does that just not really work?
Oh, 100%. And I think it just depends on the types of questions you ask. If you're asking more academic questions, that might take a little bit of time for them to build comfortableness and get comfortable with that. But if you're having them answer fun questions like, who's your favorite historical figure? Or, do you prefer TV shows or movies? Do you like sweet candy or sour candy? If you keep it light, they want to talk about those kinds of things.
Yeah, and it's all building common ground and getting to know each other and stuff. So it's really nice, very nice.
Yeah.
But are there any other problems that like maybe you didn't anticipate at the start, but you anticipate now as part of the planning?
Yes, a couple of things. I mean, there are awkward silences. So sometimes you just have to embrace the awkwardness, and I call it out. Like I'll actually say, this is an awkward silence, and it'll get students to laugh. So, just
a nice collocation as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, there was an expectation that students were to have their videos on all the time. However, that causes a lot of glitching and lagging for a lot of students because they are often at home with other siblings who are trying to get on the Wi-Fi as well. So
Okay.
having new approaches and not necessarily requiring cameras to be on all the time, but having fun ways to check in with students to make sure they're still there too, because it's can be really easy to get distracted online. You know, they'll open up YouTube or
Yeah,
things
of
like that.
course. I
So
probably would.
yeah, absolutely.
So how do you do that? How do you sort of make sure they're still there if the video isn't on?
Yeah, well, I think it's really important to have some connection and have different parts of the lesson where you at least check in and see their cameras, because we're human beings. We want to interact with people. And you and I, for example, it's so wonderful, but I know that we would be able to do so much more if we were actually together in Ireland or in San Diego. And so what I do is when students come in, I ask them to turn on their camera just so I can wave good morning to them, and then they turn it off. And then I'll do random check-ins too, just to make sure they're still there. So I'll say, okay, we're going to take a 5-minute break, and then you're going to come back and we're going to turn cameras on. And so it's just a quick
Okay.
check-in. They all turn them on, wave to each other, and then they can turn them off. My most important thing that I do is at the end of class, they have to turn on their cameras to be dismissed, because then I can say their names one by one, wave to them, wish them a good day, and things like that. It's not only helpful, but it helps build that community as well.
Oh, that's so nice. And I think also turning off the videos gives them a bit of breathing room, and you a bit of breathing
Yes.
room as well, I'd
Mm-hmm.
imagine, because it's from what I've heard, it's very, very intense teaching online.
It just it definitely takes some navigating through. There's going to be different things. I actually always keep my camera on if I can, but if a student tells me that their computer is lagging and every other camera is off, but mine's the only one that's on, I'll turn mine off too. But
Okay.
it is, as teachers, we feel like we always have to be on. So getting a
Yeah.
little bit of a camera break can be really helpful, and just showing the students, hey, I'm going to take a quick break, but I also know when I need to come back and be prepared. So
Yeah. Nice.
yeah.
So how about like middle school? I imagine can be quite an awkward age in terms of students talking to each other, or maybe having a bit of fear or embarrassment of speaking English out loud to
Hmm.
you. Um, and just basically just that age where it might be difficult to engage them. So I think this is a bit of a two-part question, but what strategies do you use to engage your students to
Hmm.
make sure they're interested in what you're doing? And then how do you then get them to actually talk and produce language?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think there are a lot of different things that you can do. For me personally, being a language and literature teacher, as we've talked about before, it's really getting them to use the language. So, what I'll often do is if we're having a discussion, for example, the other day, my 7th graders and I were talking about Colin Kaepernick, was a former NFL football player who took a knee, and it was this whole thing a couple years ago. So the students actually read a couple of articles about this and just some of the things that happened after the fact. And to prepare for the discussion, I actually put them on a Jamboard, which I mentioned in our last episode together, where they could just put virtual sticky notes of their thoughts and just kind of get an idea down of what they thought about these articles, about the situation. We really focused on individuals' actions and then the reactions to those actions.
Mm,
I think doing that ahead of time, where they can see a collaborative board where they're seeing all these ideas, empowers them, because if they're stuck a little bit in the beginning, I'm not sure where to start, they can at least see some examples and then get their thoughts going.
okay, that's
So we've done
nice.
that, and then we'll go into discussion groups. And in the last episode, I mentioned how I do different breakout rooms. So if a student
Yeah.
still needs more support, they might stay in the main room with me. If they're in the second breakout room, they might be talking with a partner with their videos and their microphones on. You had mentioned, they might get a little camera shy. So I'll have another breakout room where it's for students who just want to communicate through the chat. So just giving them different options to communicate, I think, is really, really important, and not forcing them to communicate with their microphones and cameras on at the very beginning, but kind of easing them into it.
Mm. I saw today actually there's a lady on Instagram, and her
Mhm.
Instagram handle is writing up and down. Do you know her?
I don't.
Writing
I
up and
don't.
down. She had like a 4-slide post, and one of the things she put on was like a screenshot of her lesson, and she
Mhm.
had like how to ask questions, and she had a little thing where they can either ask her directly or they can write. So she gives them the two options. So
Mhm.
that sounds kind of similar to what you're doing, but I just think that's a really nice idea. Like give them the choice
Yeah,
build their
yeah.
confidence a bit. I think that's really important, especially at that age, you know.
Yeah, for example, I had a student at the beginning. He talks to me now, but in the beginning, he actually would use a voice translator where he would type what he wanted and then just play it, and it would say it out loud. I don't know if he thought that I would not be able to tell the difference between like a very robotic voice versus his. But I didn't push him on it either. I didn't,
No.
it's like he's trying to communicate, and now he unmutes himself and asks questions all the time. So I think it's just meeting the kids where they're at and giving them the stepping tools to get to where you want them to be.
Yeah, a bit of time and space. I think confidence building is huge, and I think maybe that's something people or some teachers may underestimate. And it might be very easy to think, oh, maybe they're being a bit lazy or they can't be bothered. But maybe it is just a case of they're shy or they don't have any confidence.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Or
Mm.
even being virtual, sometimes the kids' computers freeze, and so we might as
Yeah.
teachers think, oh, they're just not participating, but on their end they're trying so hard to communicate but they can't. And that's something
Yeah.
that I had to learn too. I it's been my motto this year is just assume the best, and if the students are having not communicating, there's a reason for it. They're not just trying to not communicate or participate.
Yeah.
So
Nice. It's a lovely attitude. So this kind of leads into, because I think what you've just spoken about and building relationships with students is kind of connected. So what are your top tips for building those relationships with your students?
I mean, I think one of the most important things is using your students' names. I think virtually, even with my attendance, sometimes I can just take attendance and they're coming into the Zoom and I'm not saying good morning because I'm so busy taking attendance. And I think just acknowledging that the kids are there and using their names is like the most important thing you can do. What I also like to do is I actually have new students on Monday because we're on a quarter system. So I'll have new students. And what I'll have them
Okay.
do is record a video just to share with me, telling me about themselves. And then I'll ask them how to pronounce their names because students have very unique pronunciations sometimes. Like, for example, you could have Andrea, Andrea, like Andrea,
Yeah.
all these different pronunciations. And then what I'll do is I mentioned the popsicle sticks. I'll write their name, the pronunciation, and then I'll actually write a few notes about them. So when we are doing the attendance question or they might be working on something, I'll send them a private message through Zoom and say, hey, how are you today? How's your brother doing? If they mentioned a brother and they're going to
Oh,
know, or,
nice.
hey, you mentioned that you really like soccer. Are you able to play soccer right now? So just doing those little check-ins. I try to connect with the kids at least once a week through private messaging on Zoom, just to check in with them.
You'd make a great hairdresser if you wanted to change careers.
Thanks.
Uh, okay, so um, again, just sort of having a look on Instagram and stuff. Some teachers are quite stressed. I'm sure there's a million reasons for that, but do you have any tips sort of just to reduce or take away some of that stress? And where do you think a lot of that stress comes from as well?
Well, I think first of all, with just everything that's been going on and just the climate of government and things, especially in the US, there's been so many high and low points for teachers. And I'm assuming this is around the world as well, where, when the pandemic first happened, teachers were looked at as heroes because we quickly adjusted,
Yeah.
we were able to do all these things. And then all of a sudden, once the new school year started, now teachers are not necessarily the greatest because they don't want to go back to school because it's not safe, and now we're these terrible people that only care about ourselves. And so I think some of that stress and pressure comes from outside. I also think we
Mm,
put a lot of it on ourselves because we know that we're responsible for 10, 20, 30, up to hundreds of students, academics. And so I think a lot of that comes from that. And my biggest piece of advice is less is more. I think for me, this was something that I struggled with when we first went virtual. I was trying to make it exactly like we were still in the classroom. And that is so challenging. And when I say
mm.
this, it's not lowering our expectations, but thinking, okay, how can I dive deeper with this curriculum and not go so broad? Because, the kids are navigating through new curriculum at a grade level and also learning virtually without having the socialization they're used to with their peers. They don't have those breaks that they used to at school, recess or lunch or whatever it might be. And so less is more, go deeper with your content. If you're going to read a text, don't just take 2 days to read it and analyze it, take a whole week to and do different things with it. It's going to take away a lot of the stress on ourselves because we're not having to prepare as much. And the kids are also going to be able to do better with it because they're going to get, review, repetition, and they're really going to be able to master those skills. So as a teacher, I think it comes down to like, do you want your kids to kind of know 10 standards or 20 standards, or do you really want them to have a solid understanding of 5 to 7, right?
Yeah.
And so that would be
And I
my
think
advice.
also if you're using the same material, you get a chance to flex your creative muscles a little bit. And what can I do? How can I exploit this text? You can go into it linguistically. I mean, there's so many things you can do with a text or a video, like
100%. And I know we were talking about that in the last episode too. So, you could take a music video, you could do vocabulary with it, and then you could have them, create a story for it and all these things. Like you said, I think it's a great way to increase that creativity too.
Yeah, absolutely. So what about, like, you sort of mentioned very briefly the materials you use. I don't know if you've already answered this or not now at this point, but adapting course book material, do you use like a curriculum tech? What do you use?
So with our district, we do have an online workbook that students can use.
Okay.
I work at a specific school where we're an international baccalaureate school, so we have a little bit different approach to it. But bottom line, if you're virtual teaching, find programs that are already made that you can make your own and tweak it and adjust it. So for example, there are companies called like News ELA who have tons of nonfiction articles, differentiated levels, questions that go with it. So you can take those things and have it already online for the kids. And then, like you said, flex your creative muscle and do more with it. So News ELA or Common Lit are 2 websites that are free, and they offer really great, practices, information, leveled text, all those kinds of things.
Yeah. I think also for teachers in private language schools, I think The Guardian Online, I'm pretty sure, does English lesson articles with questions and stuff like that. So I'll put all those links on the show notes. So if you're listening, don't panic, it'll all be there. And we were chatting a little bit briefly last week about waiting time. Do you want to just go into that?
Yeah, I think, and we kind of touched on it a little bit earlier too, is waiting time. I think especially when you're a new teacher, when you're standing in front of the classroom, you might seconds feel like hours, right? Because we always feel like we want to fill those awkward silences, right?
Yeah.
And we're all learning. For example, I was just observed the other day by my assistant principal. She timed my wait time and she's like, okay, some of your wait times were only about 20 seconds. And that's so fast, right? So as me as an educator, I have to think, okay, how can I give more wait time? Because again, with virtual, it could be computers lagging, students just need think time. So I actually set an alarm on my watch now for, a minute or 2 minutes, depending on the question, so that it really forces me to give more wait time because, seconds can feel like minutes or hours even. And we do need to give students that processing time.
Yeah. I mean, I've been teaching for a long time, but I can say I'm definitely guilty of probably not giving students enough wait time because, like you say, it's excruciating sometimes if there's a 30-second silence and you're just like, come on, speak.
Right. So I do try to give at least 60 seconds. And if they're still not engaging, I'll ask them, do you need more thinking time or would you like me to go to someone else and come back? Never letting them off the hook because we need to get that engagement and that participation. But sometimes, they just get a little nervous. So giving them a little bit of wait time and then, do you need more thinking time or do you go to someone else and come back? So,
and also they're not always keen on asking for help or saying, I don't know.
Yes.
So sometimes at the end you sort of need to go, do you need a hand or do you want somebody else to answer the question or something like that? But
even doing that, sometimes the students still won't ask for help, but you do as much as you can as a teacher, right? You can't do everything. You can't force a kid to ask a question, but you can just encourage them and remind them that you're there for them.
Could they do you have a capability that allows them to message you? Like if they don't want to say it, they can message you and go, I don't know, or don't want to answer this question. Yeah.
So the nice thing is with Zoom and Google Meet, there is a chat feature. I know with Zoom, they can send private messages as well. And then we also use Google Classroom, which I mentioned in the last episode. And we can private comment there as well. So if they're working on assignment on their own, if they have a question, they can actually leave a comment and it will pop up in my email and notify me. So
Okay.
it's definitely a lot of
Yeah.
help.
Yeah, so it seems like there are lots of different ways for you and the student to communicate with each other, maybe even more so online, because you don't really have that private function in a classroom, you know, like
100%.
some students will just sit there like in silence, not answering the question, not knowing how to answer the question, not being able to say I don't know. But with the virtual, they can just type it to you, which is really nice. Yeah,
100%. I'm actually glad you mentioned that, because I have gotten more students that ask for help because they know it's in the privacy of just them and me, instead of in class raising their hand and asking.
how could you continue that when you go back into the classroom, or do you think you will have established enough trust by that point?
I think what I'll do is, I mean, I hope that students, feel open to ask those questions, but I think what I'll have is actually just a running document where they can ask questions, and I can answer on that document just back and forth. So I
Yeah.
think just giving them that option. I know we've talked about, sometimes just speaking, they get a little tongue tied or they're not sure. So giving them a way to write as well and express questions or things that they might need help with.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Um, Last question. Have you done anything that's just bombed? And what have you learned from it?
Yes, 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 yes. And if any teacher said they've never tried something that bombed, they're lying, because come
They're
on,
lying.
they're lying.
Absolutely.
They're lying. And I think, you've mentioned Instagram, and I think, with this pandemic, I think a lot of teachers just want to be positive and they don't necessarily share the things that have bombed, but trust me, it happens.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
for example, I was able to go to school and actually hand out copies of reading books to students. And I had this whole plan in my mind of, we're going to do reading groups and it's going to be great. They're going to be able to go to breakout rooms and read. That bombed because some students didn't read at all. Some students read on pace, some students read ahead. And so when they were getting in the breakout rooms, it was like they didn't know where to start reading together because they just didn't have that self-management yet. I kind of threw it at
Yeah.
them pretty early. So that definitely bombed. I ended up having to not have them read together. And I actually used a program called Flipgrid, which is also free. It's video recording. And so instead of them getting into breakout rooms to read, they would read on their own and then record videos and comment on each other's videos in their group. So they still collaborated, but it wasn't that, that they were getting in a breakout room and then one student was on page 100 and the other was on page 5. Like, where do you start? So
Yeah.
yeah, that's definitely bombed.
But the great thing about that is like you can reflect and learn,
Yeah.
so I don't mind when things go wrong in class, because you've got to a good teacher takes risks, tries new things. And if it bombs, one, it could just be the class itself, maybe it just didn't work with this particular class, or maybe you just got it completely wrong, but this is how I'll do it next time. So it's all
Yeah.
good. It's all good.
Yeah. And the
Teaching
last
is
thing
learning.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll say on that is what was really helpful, and I should have mentioned it earlier, but whenever you're starting a class with students, I highly recommend creating an essential agreement, and you essentially ask students, how do you like to be shown respect? How do you show respect to others? What do you value? How's that going to show up in our class? Because, for example, with that bombing of the reading groups, students were not staying on track. And so I was able to revisit the essential agreement with them and say, hey, you told me that you valued this, this, and this, and yet we're not seeing that in reading groups. So how can we adjust, and making it more of a learning opportunity and being transparent with the kids to a certain degree of things that didn't go well. Like I told them, hey, the reading groups are not going very well. I realize that. I know you see that. Let's think about what we can do to make it better.
Well, that's nice. Incorporating them into the reflection is really nice as well. Yeah, that's
100%.
really nice. So you mentioned in our conversation last week some free programs. Now, this isn't going to apply to everybody listening, but if you're teaching in a state school like Erin, you mentioned some free programs to communicate with parents.
Yeah.
You talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the program that I use is called Class Dojo. It's a website and there's an app for it.
Oh, yeah.
And essentially, Class Dojo, what I like about it is there's so many different features in it. There's an attendance where parents can see virtually. A lot of parents are working, so they don't know if their their student is showing up for virtual meets, but they can get that instant access. If they see I marked them absent,
That's
they can
nice.
follow up. There are randomizer tools and things like that. There's music on there that you can play for students. But my favorite part about it, two things. One is you can direct message parents. You can get them hooked up to Class Dojo, and the parents can set up what language they want to receive messages in. So I have a lot of parents who speak Spanish as their first language. So I can send out messages and it automatically will translate into Spanish for them, which is awesome. And vice versa.
That's amazing.
So if they write me, it'll translate to English for me, which is so good.
Brilliant. That's really, really good. Yeah.
That's great. And then
Wow.
the other thing that I really love is with Class Dojo, and this ties into the essential agreement too, is students, you can use it for participation. So you can do positive participation points, or you can do negative points if you choose. I know some teachers don't like doing negative points. For our essential agreement, I ask students, hey, what do you want to earn? Like, what do you want to work towards? And then do you want to have points taken away for certain behaviors? And all my students this past quarter, they all wanted to have points for, if you were late and didn't tell the teacher why you were late, you'd lose a point, or different things like that. And then, they earn points for participating in the chat or having their video on or doing these things. And the nice thing is whenever you give points or you take away points on the app, you can actually put a little note, which will send it to parents. So parents can see the points their kids have earned, they can see the points their kids have lost, and they get a notice as to why. So if I took away a point, it could say, didn't turn in work, for the day or whatever it might be.
That's really nice. It kind of takes a bit of the pressure off of you, involving the parent. They have to be accountable to them as well, which is nice.
Yeah.
Good, lovely. Yeah. We'll stick all of those links on the show notes, guys.
Yeah.
Would you like to plug your pod and tell us where we can find you on social media?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much again. And if anyone's listening and they are virtual teaching right now, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm here just sharing what I've learned over the past couple months. I'm by no means an expert, but I'm sharing what I know, right? So you can find me on Instagram, Erin Myers, with a dot in between. So Erin.Myers. And I also have a podcast called the Educator's Mindset Podcast, which I've been so blessed to have you, Erin, on my podcast as well. And so I just think, us teachers always have to stick together, and especially through the pandemic, sharing all that we can.
And you've shared some really, really nice tips today. I'm really happy I did this episode. I've been wanting to do something like this for a while because, like I said, I don't know. So, it's nice to have someone who has some really nice ideas, really just engaging ideas. Like, it's so important to, build those relationships with your students and stuff. So thank you once again. And please like, share and follow everything EFL on Instagram, Facebook or Twitter. Find the link to the podcast on our social media bios and listen on Spotify, Anchor, wherever. And don't forget to tell your colleagues, share the love. Bye.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.